Right, well, we're at 2 after. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We are recording here today, so we'll make sure that when that recording is up, registrants are aware of that if you missed the very beginning here. But I know Tanya has a lot of great information to get through, so don't want to hold things up too much longer here. So welcome everybody to our last Midwest BDC education session of May. This is Public Utility Commission 101. We're so glad that you're able to join us this afternoon. My name is Jacob Surfling. I'm the Director of Policy and Projects here at Midwest BDC. And if this is your first time joining us for a Midwest BDC event, just at a high level, the mission of our coalition is to develop and implement equitable strategies to achieve zero emissions from the Midwestern building sector by 2050. And certainly the way that our electric and gas utilities across the region are regulated plays into that mission quite a bit. We have 8 priority states that we mainly work in. Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. We have members that cross over into other parts of the country or work nationally. And certainly we get folks from across the country joining us for some of these educational sessions, and we welcome you as well. But these are our main priority states that we focus the bulk of our work in. At Midwest BDC, we operate under a set of community norms. I'm not going to read through them all right now, but I'll leave them up on the screen there. Mostly just to make sure that we're all working on equal footing when we have time for discussion, or being respectful of each other when we have that discussion time. So if we get into Q&A and more interactive parts of our time here this afternoon, and you see you not abiding by some of these community norms, you may get a light reminder about them, but I don't foresee that being a problem here this afternoon. And then, yeah, without further ado, I want to get into the content of our presentation here this afternoon. Our presenter on Public Utility Commissions 101 is Tanya Paslawski. She's the founder and principal of Elevated Engagement, and an attorney and veteran of the energy industry that brings 20 years of experience working in that regulatory policy analysis, development, and advocacy space. She served in a variety of leadership roles in the public and private sector around these state and federal policy issues, including being on Governor Whitmer's Michigan Council on Climate Solutions and the Upper Peninsula Energy Task Force. Tanya is also the co-founder and facilitator of Advancing White Anti-Racist Education, providing training and supporting conversations on systemic inequities and tools for change, and was the lead author on State Energy Justice Roundtable Series Participation in Decision Making, a publication of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. So she really knows this space inside and out, and we're really glad to have her on board to do this entry into utility commissions with us here this afternoon. And then before we get into that, I'll just tease that Tanya is also advising us on our upcoming regulatory working group that's launching this summer. So if you're a Midwest BDC member, watch for details on that. We're intending to have the kickoff meeting on July 9th. So if you want to continue diving into this topic after today's session, really hope that you'll engage with that working group moving forward. And with that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Tanya for this afternoon's presentation.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you to MWBDC for giving me some space in this forum to talk about this topic. As noted, it is really where I have spent most of my career, and is a place where so many critical decisions are made about energy issues. And it is also very opaque and institutional and difficult to navigate. So, being able to share some of the things that I know about this topic with advocates like all of you that I know are out really making change in the energy space is an honor and a privilege. I'll also say I would love for this to be interactive. So as we go, if any of you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand or put those in the chat. And also recognize that as I am presenting, I can't see those. So Jacob will be helping by sharing your questions or just stopping me when it is time to discuss something. So with that, here is just a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. I know it seems really basic on the what is a utility, but it does matter somewhat in how we think about the public utility commissions and their roles. The types of utilities, which also is influential in identifying which ones the commissions have authority over and which ones they don't. There are a variety of regulators in the energy space, so just want to make clear what parts of the energy system the state regulators have control over versus the feds. And then we'll get into a number of things about the utility commissions themselves, with hopefully ending with some ideas on how to navigate them. This description or this definition here is from the dictionary, from the Merriam-Webster dictionary on what a public utility is. And so really, and again, I know we all sort of intuitively know what we consider public utilities, right? It's water, electricity, fossil gas to heat our homes, and then, could be things like trash pickup and just things that are essential to how we operate as individuals, as a society. But often, and particularly in the context of the public utility commissions, many of them are monopolies that are naturally not subject to competition, that offer services where we don't necessarily want multiple people, multiple companies building electric wires, for instance, or building multiple versions of gas infrastructure, if that, right, whatever it is, that having only one set makes a lot of sense. And so that is really the theory behind regulation, is that we have these types of services that make sense to be a monopoly, but then if there is no competition, how should those be managed and receive oversight? That's where public utility commissions come in. And there's a long history of the development of regulation that I'm not getting into here. There is some curriculum in the People Utilities Commons that's out there that has a great overall history of how we got to the regulatory structure we have today. So the types of utilities, you'll see there's a couple places in the presentation where I have red circles, and that's because those things in the red circles are the things that pertain to or are part of the regulatory environment for public utility commissions. And in this instance, right, looking at, there were really three types of, and this is for electric service. It's similar for gas, though often you have you have most of the gas served by an investor-owned utility. There are fewer municipalities and rural electric cooperatives providing that service. So this is focused largely on electric service. There's some nuance underneath it for other forms of service. But I think, as you all know, municipalities can own and operate utility companies, and there are many of them out there that are often named after the city that they serve, tend to be a bit smaller, but they are nonprofit and they are locally regulated, often not subject to the authority of the Public Utility Commission in any way. And so that is one structure. That's actually my utility is a local municipality. So that's one potential structure. The cooperatives were, and rural electric is there because they were really developed in rural areas where for-profit utility companies, it was too expensive for them to serve some rural areas. And so people in those communities got together and created their own utilities. And so those are managed by a voting structure within that membership in the cooperative. Often, again, it is local folks doing it, but the legal structure is a bit different because it, again, operates as a cooperative rather than a local unit of government. And so similarly, those are nonprofit organizations. They are held accountable by the elected board members. But what is subject to public utility commissions is the investor-owned utilities. Those are for-profit companies that also provide dividends to shareholders. They are shareholder-owned. There are private boards that are, elected by the shareholders to run those companies. And they are, again, the ones that come to the Public Utility Commission with the question of how much money, among other things that we'll go through, but how much money should they be able to earn is certainly part of the role of the Public Utility Commission to decide and what rates they should be able to charge. And just to give you a sense of this dynamic among the types of utilities, investor-owned utilities, as you can see by the numbers on the top, there are many fewer of them. There's only 168. That's the graph on the bottom and to the left, but they actually serve the majority of people in the United States. So the utility service territories are the three graphics on the top. We're obviously talking about the investor-owned. But just to put it in perspective of fewer companies, and they get fewer all the time, there often is consolidation at the corporate level of multiple utilities. And their influence and the decisions that are made about those companies touch many, many more people than some of those more local approaches or more local structures. I mentioned we talk a little bit about the demarcation between federal and state, because I think it's important as folks who may be advocating in a public utility commission to have a good understanding of what the commissions have authority over and what they don't. And so this is a very basic overview of what an electric system would look like. But essentially, the things that are what in the industry are considered wholesale, which are like generation resources, large generation resources, right? The things, as we think about the legacy of utilities, the large power plants that were built to serve, many, many customers. And then there are the transmission wires, which are the big wires that run down the freeway, not the wires that run down your street at home, that are built and intended to move power long distances. So those types of entities, and with generation, it's a little bit nuanced, but those aspects of the system are regulated by the federal government and by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. But as the transmission wires do what we call step down, like as the voltage from transmission comes into what you can actually use in your home, and there are substations that are part of that system, what's on the other side of that is considered the distribution system. So the parts, the wires and the infrastructure that's actually serving your home is that on the distribution system. That is the piece that the state has authority over. So at a high level, again, it's wholesale and retail, because the stuff that is being sold to you at the distribution level. So, and that's a line of demarcation is wholesale and retail, or what, is serving you directly, and what is, at the larger aspects of the system. Sorry, I already spent way too much time on that. Wanted to just provide a little more description of that. As you can see here, that was what I was noting is big power plants, transmission wires, but the public utility commissions, state regulatory authorities are from the stuff that's really in your neighborhood and delivering service to customers and to people. And that was an old version of what the system looked like. Here is one that I think many of us here aspire to, where you're seeing many more resources on the distribution system and closer to the customer that in fact will be part of the authority of the public utility commissions. And this is the natural gas system, just so it operates similarly, that there's a wholesale aspect of that system, and then there's a retail part of it that's the part that is in your neighborhood and serves your homes. So what actually is a PUC? They can be called public utility commissions or public service commissions. And there are also some other unique terms, not terms for them, but just how they are named in legislation. As noted here, they are established in statute. So for every public utility commission, there is a section of the law that lays out how they will be structured and what their authority is. And for instance, in Illinois, it's called the Illinois Commerce Commission, not a public utility commission. So just if you happen to hear something that's different, there are a variety of terms for the same function. There's a variety as well on some of the actual commissioners that serve in these roles are appointed typically by governors. There are some places where there's some legislative influence, but usually appointment is by governors. And then some are actually elected. I think there are 11 states that have elected commissioners. So that's subject to a whole different process for selection in terms of if it's a place where you were wanting to have influence. 3 to 7 members are I think all of them are somewhere between 3 and 7 members. One of them is always the chair, that's the administrative head of that agency. And then they are structured with 4 to 6 year terms, but those tend to be staggered so that you don't have an entire board coming and going at once, or an entire commission, I should say. It'll be, every 2 years or so, one of the commissioners' term is ending, and then a new person is coming on board, unless they are reappointed. And certainly in most places, they can be reappointed or reelected. And there's often in those statutes a requirement for party diversity. So it will say no more than, maybe 1 over a majority can be from one party. And then that is a requirement as not so much for the elected places, but for a governor who's doing an appointment, that there has to be that party affiliation. And there are all kinds of independents out there in the utility regulatory world. I'm also want to bring to your attention that there's the Chisholm Legacy Project did a really amazing report that we'll make sure, I don't know if anyone in the MWBDC team I have it up on my screen, but don't know how to get it over to you, the link to that report. It's a great overview of public utility commissions, but more importantly, gets into the demographics of who holds those positions, because they are positions of power. And I'm sure folks on this call will not be surprised to learn that they are overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male. That is changing, but it is a reality of the people who are in charge of decision-making in this space. This is just a there's so many things that happen at public utility commissions. It's really hard to feel like to do a comprehensive overview because there are so many things, and it could be so complicated the way things weave together. But this, I'm hoping, is providing a quick overview of what their authority and responsibilities are. as back to the red things to draw your attention, this varies by state in whatever that statute is that creates the entity, and there can be other legislation and law, obviously, that is passed that they are subject to that has influence on that authority as well. And that can obviously change over time, since the law can change over time. But often the commissions are limited, have requirements of what they have to do, and may be limited by a legislature in what they can do through that law. So important to have some sense of understanding of what that looks like in your state. You see here, it will cover what the legal structure will cover, which industries the commission has authority over. And in some places, right there are the maybe obvious ones of electricity, gas, telecommunications, water. And those vary again. Not all of them cover water, for instance. But some also have like tugboat captains, taxi licenses. Sometimes really bizarre things fall under a commission because there's a recognition someone needs to have oversight over this thing. It doesn't fit anywhere else. Put it in the Public Service Commission. So sometimes there are some interesting aspects. But this is a list that you see here of the types of oversight, types of things that the commissions have oversight over. Rates is a big one. I know you are all aware of that they're the ones that assess based on utility filings of what they would like to collect in rates, whether or not that's appropriate. Infrastructure investment and whether it's considered prudent. This is a really big issue in the natural gas space, and folks who are focused on future of gas types of proceedings, where should the utility continue to invest in natural gas infrastructure or fossil gas infrastructure if we are electrifying, and will that money then be wasted in essence by doing that? And so those are the kind of questions that a commission will be tasked with evaluating. Resource plans, and these are the IRPs, are integrated resource plans. These aren't not all states do these, but it is a comprehensive forward-looking proposal that a utility will file to say, this is how we plan to meet our future needs, what types of generation we will, how much of each type we will plan to use to serve the customers, and then that will include how much stuff we need to build to get there, if that's the case. Terms of service is often some of the things around how you're metered, how often they have to send you bills, things like that are terms of service. Reliability and being held accountable for reliability or service quality. If your power is not just out, but maybe isn't up to standard, and it, bounces your fuses every so often, that is a service quality issue. Commissions have a rulemaking and standards and practices. They set some of the basic expectations, standards of how things have to be done across the board for all utilities. So some of the work that they do is specific to a utility and what they are going to do. And then they have some work that is setting standards for the entire industry. And those are often called rulemakings, or rules that apply that set some of those requirements. But you see here, the safety is also a big issue, and some states have responsibility for pipeline safety. Some of that is the federal government, but some states have taken that responsibility. Licensing can be a big issue for states that have competition for supply. So with electricity, that might be who's actually, what generation you're buying can be a competitive supplier. Anyone who's in a state like that, that you can have someone else on your bill that's serving the electricity or the gas itself, while your utility continues to provide the wires or the infrastructure, natural or the fossil gas infrastructure to get it there, commissions are often licensing those entities to say, do they have the knowledge and the wherewithal to do that work before we allow them to serve customers? Siting is just where stuff goes. It's a big deal. And then basic consumer protection. Does anybody have, because this is a lot that I just threw at you, I'll maybe stop and see if there are any questions before we move on to just some more of the background of commissions.
I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but if
Okay.
folks had them, head in the chat just says keep crushing it. So I think we're all following along and absorbing, but yeah, I will just, yeah, as folks have questions, do feel free to put them in the chat so we can keep track of them.
Awesome. All right. This is also, I find, in kind of a nerdy way, something that's very interesting about commissions. And there's other state agencies that have a similar structure like this, but their responsibilities often span what we traditionally think of as the branches of government. So rulemaking that I mentioned, that work of setting standards for the industry in a state, that is really a legislative type role. We call it quasi-legislative because they're not the legislators, obviously, but they're doing a similar thing, right? They're creating a set of rules that applies to everyone. So consider that more in that legislative branch bucket. Commissions also have the ability to do investigation and enforcement of their rules and or orders, right? There has to be some accountability, which is more of an executive branch function of, if there is a complaint that's filed, the commission will investigate that and make a determination about it. Or if there are just, questions about whether or not a utility is doing the things that they were told to do in an order, that would be part of that. And most commissions do have some level of authority to impose fines on utilities for not following the rules that they're supposed to. And then orders, which are often how the commission is speaking in more individual cases. And those can be, as discussed earlier, about a specific utility, but can also be opening up a comment period on a particular policy issue, for instance. But those orders are, as noted there, a more quasi-judicial function when they're issuing a final order in a case and saying to a utility, okay, this is how much you can collect. These are whatever the terms of that order may be, how they're making what is akin to a judicial decision on a request that has been made of them. And as we'll talk about in a couple of slides, the process of cases is very akin to the way a court process would work, where there's evidence presented, testimony, those kind of things. And then at the end, someone makes a decision. And so in the PUC world, those decisions are orders and, again, follow a similar format. This provides some idea of standard types of proceedings. Again, a lot of this varies by state, but these case structures of a utility coming in and asking for more money, or asking to build a new power plant or invest in their system, that is a very common. Did you say something, Jacob? No. Okay. I'll keep going. So that is a very common way, and where a lot of the work of a Public Utility Commission happens is in cases. It is a more formal type of proceeding. As I mentioned, it acts often very much like a court proceeding would. But you see here, this is in thinking about how you might participate. In a case, there's something called an intervention, where you are actually participating as a party in a case. The utility is a party. I have a slide where we go through a lot of the typical parties in cases. You have business groups that are parties in cases, and that means they're participating in all of that evidence collection, providing testimonies, writing briefs that attempt to influence through the formal structure the outcomes of a particular request by a utility or a particular case. There are also often opportunities to provide things like comments, or the commission and or the utility will schedule open houses where people can come and share what they think about a particular issue and one of those cases. Sometimes those are part of the record, which is the scope of what the commission can consider when it's making its decision. And sometimes it's not. So sometimes you're sharing with the commission, this is what I think about something, but they may or may not be able to actually consider it according to the law, actually able to consider it in the case and in the decision that they make. So that's just something to be aware of. When you're an intervener and you're a party to the case, you are helping build that record. And there's no question that the work that you're doing is part of what the overall input on the case looks like. But some of the other places, even though they are regarding cases, may or may not build that record. And then just noting, a complaint process is probably another thing. I know I'm in Michigan, and there are regularly folks who are filing formal complaints, and there's a process at a PSC to say, my bill is wrong and it's been wrong, and I've tried to work it out with my utility and they aren't budging. And so I'm coming to you, commission, to help me address this issue. Most commissions have that authority and that opportunity. And then there'll be open meetings. I should say, commissions, almost all of them have what are called Open Meeting Act requirements, which means that the places where they are making those decisions, where they are approving orders, has to be open to the public and is subject to certain notice requirements, that it has to be posted in a newspaper and on their website and in different places within a week of the actual meeting taking place. Like, there are these, again, everything varies by state, but those kind of requirements. So another place to engage is in those meetings. Almost all of them have comment periods where anyone who's in attendance can make a comment about what was on the in the meeting itself, and you can comment on things that weren't in the meeting. So just knowing that that opportunity is also part of a way to share viewpoints in these commission spaces. And then just noting that there are other informal ways to do that. One big thing that I want to make sure everyone is aware of is most commissions and commissioners are open to meeting with people and groups that are in their state, and that all you have to do is ask. A lot of people don't utilize that because it seems kind of intimidating, and what am I going to go talk to them about? And certainly, like every one of us, we want to make sure, if we're asking of someone's time, that we're coming in with something that is relevant and all of those things, right? Treating others as we would like to be treated. But I just want to make sure that you all are aware of that. Having worked with a lot of different commissioners across the country, they are very interested in hearing from people, and especially from people they don't usually meet with, and will find time for you. Sometimes it's scheduled 2 months out because they're just busy, but don't be afraid to ask for that opportunity to sit down with your regulators and share your views on things. There also are often within commissions, they will open up informal stakeholder proceedings. So they might say, we want to get input on electric vehicles and what we should do in terms of where electric vehicles should go across the state, and lay out a request to open up the stakeholder process, often run by staff that work at those agencies. And then they'll have a series of meetings to collect input, to have discussions. And so it's a place where those are not an on the record type of um, forum. It isn't a forum where those things go on the record. Though sometimes coming out of those processes, there will be a report that is required on what happened and generally who said what are the options we have to work from. So those are going on often at commissions across the country. And then finally, just I know that often utilities and or commissions are scheduling meetings just to open up that opportunity, often in person, some online, to say, we're the commission, this is the stuff that we do, tell us what is on your mind and what kind of things you would hope for in the energy space, whatever it may be. So just being on alert for things like that. Again, that's a big forum where everybody's together in the same room. And sometimes it's okay, you have 3 minutes to tell us what you think, but it's just another way to be able to share what it is you would like to communicate to these decision makers.
Tanya, we do have a couple of questions in the
Okay,
chat now, if we want to pause
great.
here. So I think Ted and Brad had pretty similar questions in the chat, just wondering about the impact of having to have interveners be represented by an attorney or having certain qualifications to participate in some of these public proceedings, and how that can limit participation and comment in some cases. So I don't know if you were getting to that or wanted to comment on that a little bit now.
Yeah, let's talk about it now because it also relates a little bit to the slide I'll show next, which lays out what a case process actually looks like. But having access to lawyers, again, rules are different in every state. Most states do not require that you have a lawyer to intervene, but there are a bunch of rules and hoops you have to jump through. Like you need to file a motion to intervene in order to participate in a case. Can someone who's not a lawyer figure out how to do that? Sure, you can. But having a lawyer makes it a lot easier. There are different scheduling things of how far between briefs, reply briefs are held, or right, things like that, that just a lawyer keeping up with those things, as would be the case again in a court proceeding, is super helpful. And it's one of the things in this space as we are trying to push for equity and justice in the energy industry that we need more of, is lawyers who will do this work. Because I'm sure you all know that the utilities have plenty of lawyers to help make sure that their position is well established in these cases. So if y'all are lawyers or know lawyers that are either doing this work or interested in doing this work, please, 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 let's talk. It's been one of the things that I have been working on, is trying to see if we can build a network of lawyers so that if an organization or a person says, I want to intervene in a case in a state, we can hopefully connect you with someone that can help with that. But yes, it's massive. It's a massive issue. And we'll maybe talk about it a little bit more as we look at the rate case. But was there another question, Jacob?
Yeah, I think we have a couple other questions here as well. So we have one from Ingrid that just at a high level is asking, whose interests are the PUC really meant to represent? Are they, a body that's meant to represent the interests of consumers or the state or the utilities themselves? Are they meant to kind of be a neutral forum for all of those parties? So I think that, and then I think that also ties into a question we have from Dr. Presley, about you just recognizing that especially larger investor-owned utilities can have a lot of influence on state government, and does the commission have a role in addressing or regulating that as well?
Really good questions. So who are they there to represent? There is in the legislation that establishes the commission often language that describes what they are to consider in making their decisions. There is no language that says you represent the interests of the utility. And there's little language that says you represent the interest of frontline communities. It's a balance. And I think most commissions would say, and most of the language in essence says, it's a balance of interests. And I have some slides at the end that I didn't incorporate in here about some of the jargon in the industry that is applied to decision making. And it's things like, is it just and reasonable? Is it reasonable and prudent? Like, can it be justified, the thing that has been proposed? Often commissions will talk about the economic regulator so that they can only talk about or make decisions based on the dollars and cents, the money involved, but not consider, say, the pollution that's being caused by this thing. So the short answer is it's a balance. Most of them are tasked in their legislation that there be a balance. What is common in that legislation too is that the utilities be financially, what's the word that's used? Like, I just had it too. Like the utilities financially healthy. That there are language that essentially says that part of the commission's work is to do this, but maintain financially healthy utilities. And it may also say to serve customers at the lowest cost. So it's a mix of what's in there. It's a balance. It's not as your job is to protect consumers anywhere near as much as maybe it should be, and that a lot of folks think it is. It's not. The influence of utilities. Oh God, yes. Yes. It is the problem, is the influence of utilities politically. I was thinking about this yesterday, that the laws are written with the influence of utilities who, as most of you probably know, have people full-time assigned to talk to legislators, right? They are lobbyists on behalf of the utility who are paid very attractive wages to every day schmooze with legislators, work with them on legislation that they want, provide campaign contributions in order to influence what they do. It is the real crux of the problem, is that it's almost impossible to rival the amount of political influence that utilities have in any state across the board. And they're always working in their own interests, of course. So it's a big problem. There have been, over the last 5 or so years, let's take a step back. There was a period of time when all of those costs, all that lobbying that those utilities were doing, and their campaign contributions in some instances, were being paid for by rates. So you were paying for that, for them in essence, to work against your interests and put more money in their own pocket. And it was part of rates. Over the last 5 years, there have been more proceedings in states to say that the utilities cannot recover those types of costs, cannot recover like industry trade group dues. There's something called the Edison Electric Institute that is I don't know, I say this somewhat jokingly, right? But it's the place where all the CEOs of the utilities get together behind the scenes and talk about what they should be doing. And it's expensive to participate in. It's a very powerful group. And it's one, again, that most of the work it was doing was not to serve any of the people who were paying the rates, yet everyone was paying those costs through the rates, like they were being recovered. So in the last 5 years, a number of states have been looking at and making decisions to say you cannot include those costs in your rates, whether it's lobbying, those trade associations. There's some other categories as well in different states that they're looking at. So some, but it's like a handful of states that have done that. And it's the problem. It is the political influence of the utilities is daunting, and why we need to all work together to have our voices heard. Any more, Jacob, before I move on?
I think we can move on for now.
Okay. How am I doing on time? Ooh, gotta move quickly because I want to make sure we have time for discussion. Want to highlight again the language in red. Decisions in cases must be made based on the record, must be based on what is in the record, what is collected through the formal process of the case. So if you are not providing on the record input, it will not be considered in the case. This is also a huge problem. We talked about the need for lawyers. I have on the next slide that I pulled up a little bit before, the need for technical experts, because you need evidence. You can't just say the rates are too high. You have to say this thing that the utility is attempting to collect is inappropriate, it's imprudent, it's wrong, right? For whatever reason. So therefore it should be denied. And this over here should be denied because rates should be lower. You can go in those cases and say, we should have something that caps energy burden. That is something that can be part of what's put on the record. But if no one says we need to have there needs to be a rule that caps energy burden, for instance, it cannot be considered in a case. So even if you have a commission who would love to cap energy burden, if no one's bringing it up and providing support for it, they can't do it. They could do it outside, but not in a case, right? They could say, we want to have a policy discussion and consider policy to build this. But in a particular rate case where utilities are asking for more money, unless someone puts it on the table, it can't be considered. And then just, this is a quick, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I, again, want to make sure we have some time for discussion. But just to give you a sense of all of the steps that are involved in participating in a case. And in each of these instances, there are petitions that need to be filed. There are, right, doing just collection of testimony, which is, and cross-examination. There's also just discovery that's there. And discovery is the ability to ask questions of other parties in the case. And asking questions of the utility can be super important to really understand what they're doing and what they're asking for and why. And I know in some cases I've been involved in, some of those questions are, how much of your investment are going to communities that have been identified as disadvantaged, frontline, what in the state, whatever the state definition is, how much of your investment has actually been in those communities? Those are the kind of questions that can be part of discovery. And so just, and it takes a lot of work too, right? That's why having support in these spaces, especially when it isn't a full-time job for, I'm sure most or all of you here, a full-time job to do this work, having a support structure with a lawyer and with some technical experts is so critical because there's just so much that goes into it. So you see this, that might be a whole other training that we could do sometime, is like, let's talk about rate cases, because there's just, for each one of these things, there's a lot that we could get into. Mentioned earlier, who are sort of the players, who are the parties in the cases? And this is a list that you can see here. Staff is always part of it. They always come in with their own views of what should happen in a case. they would say they represent people, but also a balance of interests in how they're approaching, right, what they're asking and what they're submitting on the record. Industry and business trade groups are always there. Many of them are participating as individual businesses if they feel like either there's something that they want or they'll be impacted by some outcome. But there being, for instance, a large industry trade group that participates in like every case is very common. Most states have consumer advocates of varying levels of funding, like how much do they really have to try to do this work? Right? How many attorneys do they have to try to have influence? Some are most woefully underfunded. I know we've had a rise of the Citizens Utilities Board, or CUB, in some states over the years, and have gotten funding to try to really focus on residential customers, or ratepayers that are not business customers. But that's still, right, there's is still a lot of opportunity for work to be done in that space. And then increasingly environmental groups are at the table. And that's another sort of positive thing, but there can be the dynamic that the environmental issues are front and center, and the issues that really impact communities who've been harmed by the legacy system or just harmed by the systems in this country may not be elevated. So it's why part of this presentation is to open up the door for folks who maybe haven't considered participating in cases to think about doing that, so that we can add to this list as a regular participant community organizations or frontline groups. Want to just raise intervener compensation. We talked about lawyers, we talked about technical experts. In this resources list, intervener compensation is available in some states. Most of it is not great or helpful, but it is funding that's available to support people who otherwise wouldn't be participating to participate in cases at the PUC. Sometimes it's a reimbursement method, so you have to get all the way through the case and all the way through the lawyer work and the technical work and the work of you all as expert witnesses to talk about what is the impact of this request on my community. And all of that has to be provided upfront, and that you don't get paid until after the case is over. And sometimes these cases take a year. Some of them can take like 2 years. So it makes it almost impossible for that funding to be valuable. You end up getting small businesses that take advantage of those. Michigan has an amazing structure. Might be something that people can advocate for as part of your work, that there be intervener compensation structures and programs that actually allow people who don't otherwise have funding to fully participate in a case by having availability of funds up front, of being able to get reimbursements on like a monthly basis. We have some, again, Michigan has a pretty good structure, and we do have a couple of frontline organizations that have participated in cases because that funding has been available, but a lot of work that could be done there. And then just quickly, tips. Evidence matters. This is really tips on effective advocacy. You have to have some evidence, and how that's defined, there could be a lot we could discuss there, but it can't, again, just be a blanket statement of do this better or make this cheaper. There has to be some evidence of impact, etc. Have a vision going into a case like this, or even just with that informal conversation with the Public Utility Commission, saying this is what we envision for our community or our group or whatever it is really, really impactful. Because often the commissioners, having, again, spent a lot of time with commissioners across the country, there are many who say, I would like to do equity and justice better, but they don't really see what it looks like. They have a hard time envisioning where they're trying to get to even figure out how to begin. And they maybe should know better. And I wouldn't disagree if someone said, come on, how do they not know better? But that is just a reality. And so having a vision that you can share of this is what the energy future looks like for the state, for my community, for my group, whatever it is, super valuable. And if you can put that in writing, it's even better. And then I have in here share resources. In these cases, groups can usually work together. So having groups work collectively is valuable, right? It reduces the burden on any one organization, but make sure everybody's named, because when you have a list of the parties that are involved or supporting a particular position, that is really, really powerful. And so it is the getting the more momentum to push back against what is a structure that is not built for the folks, any average person, any residential customer, let alone folks who I know have been subjected to some of the worst impacts of the industry, to really be out front on these in these types of cases. And then let me just, I have one more thing that is of any substance. Knowing kind of how to find out what's going on is important. And I'll say, if anybody wants to chat about a particular commission and how you can maybe engage and sign up for some of the stuff that they send out, I'll be happy to talk to you and walk through that. But you can sign up things like the press releases that the commission is sending out. Most of them have a listserv for those things. They have a schedule of commission meetings, again, that open meetings requirement that we talked about. So you can see what they're talking about, what kind of cases they're hearing. Most commissions now have electronic dockets. So if you learn about a case number and want to see who's filed what, you can go on the web and be able to look at who's participating in the case, what kind of things are they saying. You can really dig in and see what's there. So it's another great resource. And then I have just a list of things there. Usually there's an About Us on a commission website that has a bunch of the things that they are sharing about themselves or are required to report. Some have reports to the legislature. They have to do new programs. Most of them file annual reports, what we've been doing this year. But you can learn about their strategic plan, their mission, things like that, so that you get a sense as you're going in to talk to them, how they see themselves, and how they see their role, because that will be sometimes in the mission, what they think they're trying to accomplish. So with that, this is how you can reach me. I know that these slides will go out. I also do have on my website, there's a sort of list of resources and tools that I've been collecting, because there's so many more coming up. I need to update it probably, but if you go to the website elevatedengagement.org, up in the right-hand corner, there is a link to a document that has some stuff on mapping, for instance, or what does engagement look like, so that you can maybe share a report with the commission and say, we think you should be doing something like this. What some of the resources are for participating in commissions. So just some things that hopefully will be helpful. And I'm out of time. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. All right, that's it. I'm going to stop sharing. Sorry, everyone.
No, no worries. I think that was all good information, Tanya. So I see we have a few folks that have held on here to the bitter end. So if we had any last questions that we can try to get to here at the end. I know we had one from Mernice that I missed earlier on, asking about FERC and how they come into play in the system. I don't know if you want to talk on that kind of federal regulation, and I'll watch for any other questions, but I think the rest is just comments and things about sharing this out, which we will get the information that Tanya shared out on the website and things like that.
Yes. And You said there was a question about federal regulation that I
Yeah,
missed?
just, I know you touched on this maybe towards the beginning about kind of that delineation of what's federal and what's state level, but if you just wanted to touch a little bit on FERC and, you know, what their role in regulating that overall system is.
Yeah, so FERC has very little to do with the rates that you're paying. They are setting rates for the transmission service. Again, the wires that run down the freeway, not the ones that are on your street at home. They are the regulator for those. And so they set the structure for what the prices will be for that. Again, that's so many of these things are a rabbit hole that it's very difficult to say concisely exactly how it works. But they set the structure for those rates that are filtered through and sometimes will show up on your bill as transmission charges. But their role is really managing transmission and what has become, I mentioned big generation earlier, but what has essentially become wholesale generation markets where utilities are trading among themselves generation. So when one is low and one has excess, there are these markets that have been created that allow them to then trade that, which is really a financial transaction. FERC oversees all of that. So really it's anything that isn't the stuff that's showing up in your neighborhood, in your community, is probably the feds, but the stuff that's close or FERC, but the stuff that's really in your community is most likely state PUC regulated. And if there's more, of course, go off mute and ask more, knowing that we're over time.
No, I think that's great. Yeah, that could be its whole
For sure.
whole 1 hour for sure.
And don't hesitate to follow up too. If someone wants to chat more about the federal state thing, please reach out.
Well, I see we're past our hour and I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat right now. So again, thank you so much, Tanya, for coming in and presenting this content to us. Thank you to everybody who attended the session this afternoon. We're glad you're here. And also plug again, please watch the West BDC channel for that ongoing regulatory working group that's going to be launching in July. We really hope some of you will decide to participate in that going forward and continue engaging with this topic. But with that, I will end the webinar and let you all get on with your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.